He thinks, oh, I'm going to get him, So he runs into the cave, but Krishna tricks him. There's a great devotee named Muchukunda sleeping in the cave from the Treta Yuga. Now we're in Dwapara Yuga, right? And Muchukunda had received a benediction that he wanted to have a long, long sleep because he had helped the demigods, right? And he got this benediction that whoever wakes him up before he wakes up naturally, all he has to do is look at him and the person will die immediately. So now Kali Yavana doesn't know this. Krishna knows this. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he runs into the cave and he hides. And Kali Yavana runs in. He sees something in the dark. Someone's sleeping. He says, oh, it's Krishna. He's such a coward. He's cowering. Like in a fetal position, afraid to fight me. So he goes up and kicks Muchukunda. Muchukunda wakes up, looks at him, and burns him to death. Right. So no one can catch Krishna. Trinavata thought he caught Krishna. Grabs him. He's a tornado. Grabs him, takes him way up in the air, and he's going to kill him. And then Krishna becomes heavier and heavier, and then Trinavata falls down and dies. Right. So it's impossible to catch Krishna or defeat Krishna or tie him up. But yet Mother Yasoda was able to do it because she's a pure devotee. So then yesterday. And that's why we meditate on Damodara Astakam for 1 month, because there's many wonderful things in this pastime, and they're extremely pure. Some people might say, like the followers of Vallabhacharya, oh, we don't want to hear about Krishna's Rasa Leela. That's in improper relationship. We just want to study Krishna. He lifted up Govardhan Hill. And he was, he grabbed the cow's tail and the cow dragged him along, We only want to hear about those pastimes. We don't want to hear about his Rasa Leela dance, Well, okay, fine, but that's, that's neither here nor there. That means they don't know. Anyway, we're not going to criticize them. They are Vaishnavas, but they should at least worship Damodar. Damodar means the Lord who was tied by a rope. And the rope is so significant that the last verse of Damodar Astakam, the devotee says, I want to worship that rope, because this abdomen around which the rope was tied, that's the abdomen from which Brahma appears. The whole universe is in the stem of the lotus, and Brahma is sitting on top of the whorl of the lotus. I worship that rope. See. So this is a very nectarine pastime, and it is an example of an absolute topmost devotee, Mother Yasoda. Okay, then we started talking about the 7th morning walk from the book Life Comes from Life, and the title is The Cheaters and the Cheated. And Prabhupada talks about Achinta Shakti. He says that whenever you study the origin of something, you end up with Achinta Shakti, mysterious or mystic power. And he talked about the law of gravity and weightlessness. He talked about, for example, he said the fault of the scientists and the evolutionists and so forth is that they always start in the middle. They never go to the beginning nor the end. Like, for example, the scientists say all life comes from chemicals. And Prabhupada said, where did the chemicals come from? Well, they're not concerned about that. Oh, they were there. So that's, and he gives a brilliant statement. He says that to observe a chain of events only from a certain point in time is unscientific. This is a brilliant point. And gives only incomplete knowledge. We must know where things begin. If we carry our investigation far enough, we will find that the origin of nature is Achinta Shakti. So he gives the example of a artist. He says, there is brain, brush, and color. So the brain, when he says brain, it's a metaphor. He's referring to the artist, right? He's not saying there's a brain. So they took somebody's brain out, and they put it in some nutrient solution, and now there's a brain. No, that's a metaphor. Brain is referring to the artist who has paint and a brush, and he paints a flower. So if you study the painting of the flower, you know its origin. It's the artist. You know how it was made. There was a brush, there was paint, there was a canvas. And you know the end. It ended up in the junkyard. Somebody threw it out. So you know beginning to end of that flower. But if you look at the real flower, you don't understand the beginning. In fact, if you try and go back to the beginning, there's mystic power there. Achintya Shakti. First of all, Prabhupada says, the brain brush and color, we can paint a flower, but we cannot conceive how vegetation throughout the whole earth is automatically growing and fructifying. We can explain the painted flower, but we cannot explain the real flower. Scientists actually cannot explain biological growth. They simply juggle words like molecule and chromosome, DNA, RNA, all that nonsense, right? But they cannot actually explain the phenomena. How did it happen? Who did it? They know an artist made the imitation flower, right? So obviously if you use logic, there must have been someone who made the original flower, right? But no, they don't say that. They talk about chromosomes and molecules and RNA and DNA, and Big Bang. As we always say, if I make a Big Bang in your kitchen, will it create a flower? No, if there are any flowers in the kitchen, it'll destroy all of them, right? So this whole Big Bang theory is nonsense. See, they have to do something about origin. So they talk about Big Bang, or whatever they talk about is completely nonsense. So scientists cannot explain biological growth. Then Prabhupada said the essential fault of the scientists is inductive. No, they use the inductive process of knowledge. Now, we explained what inductive process is, what the deductive process is, and what is spiritual deductive reasoning. There are three pramanas, three ways to establish evidence to prove if something is true or false. One is, and there's subheadings of pratyaksha, anumana, and sabda. So there's more, actually, secondary evidences. But these are the three primary evidences. So pratyaksha is direct observation. Now what's wrong with that? Every human being has 4 defects. We make mistakes, we're easy illusion, we have imperfect senses, and we have a cheating tendency. So even if you use powerful microscopes, powerful telescopes, whatever, to increase your sense perception, still we make mistakes, still our senses are imperfect, and so forth. So we can never arrive at perfect knowledge through pratyaksha, direct observation. Then there's anumana, indirect, using the scientific method. We have a hunch that something may be true, then we do a lot of experimentation. If we see a pattern that gives some level of predictability, we call it a theory. If it gives a good level of predictability, let's say 30% or 40%, or maybe even 50%, it becomes a scientific theory. But still, it's just a theory. And all you have to do is find a few cases where the predictability is not good, and then, it falls apart. Well, that happened with Newton's 3 laws of motion.
It's 5% of the known forces in the universe.
What's that?
Reading something, it says gravity, the gravitational law of Newton only explains 5% of the forces in the universe.
Okay.
That's why they have dark energy and dark matter, because the forces are there, but there is no matter. So they are speculating there is dark energy and dark matter.
Yeah, right.
Gravitational law applies only to 5% of it.
Yes, so the predictability of Newton's 3 laws of motion is only 5%, right? Predictability. And it's called a scientific theory, right? So, you see, the inductive method is imperfect. You'll never get perfect knowledge. You never understand Krishna with the inductive method, where you do a lot of experimentation, you try and see some pattern. and then you try and figure out what the predictability of that pattern is. And the predictability is maybe good in a very limited reference frame, but when you increase the reference frame to include all of reality, it falls apart, like Newton's laws. Yeah.
Another thing, not many people realize is that on all the mumbo jumbo is that when you do experimentation and then try to come up with an equation to explain something, those are based on statistical correlation. And statistics is correlation, not causation. So the Newton law says that directly proportional to the mass of the object are inversely proportional to the square of the distance. It's a correlation. It's not that the mass is causing the gravity.
Yeah, there's something else. There's something else. Yeah.
People overlook it. They don't realize it.
Well, they're not interested. No, they don't. They overlook it purposely, because that's Prabhupada's point. As soon as you go to cause, there's achintya sakti. There's mystic power that you can't understand. They can't explain it. And therefore, his point is brilliant. All these scientists fall apart. All these scientific theories fall apart when you go to cause. So he says the essential fault of scientists is that they have adopted the inductive process to arrive at their conclusion. So you see in one paragraph, Prabhupada decimates, destroys modern science, in a sense, the validity of what they're trying to do. Now, can they build bridges? Yes. Can they build submarines? Yes. Can they build rockets? Yes. Can they free themselves from birth and death? No. Because the rocket is not going to save your life, nor the submarine, nor, the bridge. And these things fall apart also. There are plenty of submarines that are on the bottom of the ocean. They sunk for different reasons. Either there's mechanical defects, or they were blown apart by these bombs or whatever. So, and there's plenty of bridges that fell apart. There was a bridge that took on the I-90. The whole thing fell apart. There was a storm and the thing fell apart. It collapsed. They had to build it again. The Bay Bridge collapsed also, not the whole thing, but parts of it collapsed in the earthquake, the big earthquake in 1988 or 89. So you see, none of these things are permanent, and none of them can save a person from birth and death. So therefore, even though they're touted as great scientific achievements, still they're not anywhere near solving the real problem of life, which is birth, death, old age, and disease. Yeah.
Like, the way to put that is realization. Modern science can exploit matter, but they cannot transcend it, which proves that they have limited understanding of matter. Because if you understand matter, then you would want to transcend it and not exploit it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you want to transcend it, you follow Krishna consciousness. It's all about transcending the influence of matter on our lives. Okay, very good point. So, God cannot be known by the inductive process. Therefore, Krishna is called ahoksaja. Adhoksaja means that you cannot understand him by direct perception. And you cannot understand by indirect perception, by anumana. Anumana means if there's smoke, there must be fire. Right? But that can be imperfect also. One day I was driving on the I-90, I saw a whole bunch of smoke, but I looked more carefully, it was a big cloud. But it looked exactly like smoke. Right? So we make mistakes very easily. So the only way we can understand Krishna is sabda pramana. Hearing statements of Krishna that are bona fide because they're Vedic statements, spoken by pure devotees. And then, by approaching a bona fide spiritual master and hearing from him the Vedic knowledge, we can overcome even our own imperfections by submissive hearing, asking important questions, and offering service. So, then we went through a list of things that differentiate modern science and the evolutionists and the atheists from the Vaishnavas. And they are they are, number one, the scientists say that they believe that evolution is evolution of bodies. The Vedas say it's evolution of consciousness, not bodies. All the bodies were created in the beginning of time. All the species were created in the beginning of time. So there's one major difference. Then the scientists say different bodily forms evolved by evolution over a long period without any supervision and simply by principles like the survival of the fittest and so forth. Whereas all the species were created in the beginning by Krishna. The living entities enter into the different species according to their previous karma. So it's just like there are many houses and apartments and townhouses being built in Sammamish right now, right? So people will inhabit them, but you can only buy one that you can afford. So your buying power is like your karma, right? So you buy a townhouse that costs $400,000. Somebody buys a big house that costs $1 million. Someone can only rent an apartment that costs $1,500 or $2,000 a month. So it's all based on that your buying power ability is your previous karma, right? In the same way, there are 8,400,000 species. They're already created by Krishna, but people inhabit them according to their previous karma. Whereas the atheists, they say, number 3, that life comes from matter, dead matter, and or life comes from chemicals, and it takes millions and millions of years, and there's infinite number of combinations and permutations, and eventually, in ancient times, there was one lightning strike at the North Pole where the pull of gravity is less and so forth, and there was a primordial soup of nutrients there, and the zap of the lightning brought things together, and there was one amoeba that was created. Now, if you make a primordial soup in your house and you zap it with electricity, will it create an amoeba? No, but if there are any amoebas in there, it'll kill them. so you see, all these theories are a bunch of nonsense, right? But, they specialize in nonsense. But Vedas say that there are two types of energies, life and matter. And they're both eternal. But life, or spirit, is superior energy, and matter is the resultant inferior energy. And they're both emanating from Krishna. So they're eternal. That means they were eternal in the past, eternal in the present, and eternal in the future. The only difference is the material energy is the inferior spiritual energy of Krishna, so therefore sometimes it's manifest, sometimes it's not. But it's still existing when it's not manifest, in a potential state. Or as E equals mc squared, sometimes matter is manifest, sometimes it goes back to its inertial state as energy. Right? Sorry. Okay, then another point is matter is independent and there's no non-material soul. If there is a soul, it has developed from matter. This is the scientist's theory. Or if there is consciousness, it's a product of matter. Whereas the spirit is independent, the soul is independent of matter. Matter is dependent on soul. Both are eternal. They do not come into existence. So here it's some stark differences between the ideas of the materialists, evolutionists, and so forth, and atheists, and the Vedic concepts. Now, unless you understand this, it's very easy to be baffled by the evolutionists and the scientists. Right? Now, there are more we can add to this list, and we should. Right? Some of the points you made are very good, about Newton's laws. They're percentage of predictability for macroscopic bodies, and so forth. So I would like to get, maybe you can write that down for me. We should complete this list. We have much information as possible. Okay, so today we're going to go, there was homework for today. And the homework was that, what's that? Yeah. Explain illusory happiness and real happiness. And for this, I gave an indication how you could do it. You look in Bhagavad Gita chapter 18, verses 36, 37, 38, 39. Explain the happiness in mode of ignorance, passion, and goodness. Now, nobody here did the homework, but it's very good homework to do if you want to learn something about Krishna consciousness. So illusory happiness, because Prabhupada spoke about illusory happiness. And I explained that if you can do this homework, then we'll be able to go back to what we discussed during the summer, which was the 6 points to convince an atheist that God exists. And anyway, what is keeping people back from making any attempt at self-realization is the illusory happiness. It's not real happiness, but they have such a low, let's say, threshold of understanding what happiness is, that they accept this illusory happiness as real happiness. And because of that, they suffer. So what is illusory happiness? So let's look at chapter 18, verses 35, 36, 37. If you have Bhagavad Gita, if you don't, you can get one, or you can go on your iPad. So, happiness, it says, O best of the Bharatas, now please hear from me about the 3 kinds of happiness by which the conditioned soul enjoys and by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distress. Purport. A conditioned soul tries to enjoy material happiness again and again. Thus he chews the chewed. This is chapter 18, verse 36. But sometimes in the course of such enjoyment, he becomes relieved from material entanglement by association with a great soul. You notice he says, but sometimes. Yeah. So, Pramanda Pramite Kona Bhagavan Jiva, Guru Krishna Prasad, Bhakti Payalata Bija, right? So it's very rare to meet a pure devotee. And it's in the human form of life, it's very rare to meet a pure devotee. But if you can, then you're most fortunate, because if you take the association of a pure devotee properly, you can become enlightened and rise above the entanglement of false happiness, illusory happiness. So you can become relieved from material entanglement by association with a great soul. In other words, a conditioned soul is always engaged in some type of sense gratification. But when he understands by good association that it is only a repetition of the same thing, he is awakened to his real Krishna consciousness. He is sometimes relieved from such repetitive so-called happiness. This is a very profound point, because he made this point in Life Comes from Life, where he said, he says here, Okay, well, we'll have to come back to it. It's actually in the previous, it was in the previous morning walk where he talks about illusory happiness. So he said, he's talking about Raghunath Das Goswami. He says, in his later life, he almost completely abstained from eating and sleeping. He would drink only a little buttermilk every 3 or 4 days, and he worked 22 hours a day, sleeping 2 or 3. And some days, he did not sleep at all. So you may ask, how could he survive? Actually, he lived for 100 years. Eating, sleeping, mating, and defending were not problems for Raghunath Das Goswami, but still he lived. Because he was a pure devotee of Krishna, he was fully aware that the soul is eternal and independent, although it has been put into this bodily cage. So that is a point, that scientists think that matter is independent. And if there is a soul, it's a product of matter, right? And it's not independent of matter. But actually, this is a major point. The soul is independent of matter. And one proof of that is Raghunath Das Goswami, where he diminished his eating and sleeping and mating, all that stuff, almost to zero. Still he lived 100 years. Because he was a pure devotee of Krishna, he was fully aware that the soul is eternal and independent, although it has been put into this bodily cage, which it actually does not require. Suppose a bird is encaged. Is he living simply because he is in the cage? Without the cage, he is free. People are thinking that by being encaged within the body, they are happy. That is nonsense. Actually, our engagement within this body makes us fearful. But as soon as we purify our existence, we do not even have to come out of our bodies. We will immediately be abhaya, fearless. We can immediately awaken to our original spiritual existence, in which there is no more fear, no more lamentation, and no more material desire. When you are conditioned, you think in terms of dualities, like hot and cold, pain and pleasure. But when you are liberated, you have no such conditioned thoughts. Spiritual life means to become unconditioned, to come to the Brahmabhuta stage. That is a perfection of life. Being conditioned means that although the living entity is eternal, due to his conditioning, he thinks that he is born, he is dying, he is diseased, and he is old. But an unconditioned person is not even old. Krishna is described in the Brahma Samhita as Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Ananta Rupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha. This means that he is the oldest person, the first person, but he has no old age. He always appears just like a young man of 20 because he is fully spiritual. So you see, this illusory happiness conditions people to be fearful, to think that they have no existence separate from the material body, to think that matter is everything and spirit is dependent on matter, to think that matter, living beings evolve from matter through evolution, bodily evolution, whereas the Vedas talk about conscious evolution. There is conscious evolution, but there's no question of bodily evolution. One body becomes better and better, and then the new species and all that. That's all nonsense. And Prabhupada clearly says, Darwin is nonsense. He says here that that is Darwin's nonsensical theory. His theory is that it is not that the lower class apartment becomes, his theory is that eventually a lower form of life becomes a higher form of life by itself, through some kind of mysterious combination and permutations of matter. That is nonsense. Microsoft did not become Microsoft by itself, right? Your house did not build itself, and your body did not build itself. You cannot transport your body from Seattle to Bombay by yourself, right? You need the help of at least 100, 150,000 people. You know, okay, go ahead, blow it. So we'll continue after the class. but at the end is just like nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. So happiness in the mode of goodness begins like poison, but ends up like nectar. In the pursuit of self-realization, one has to follow many rules and regulations to control the mind and the senses, and to concentrate the mind on the self. All these procedures are very difficult, bitter like poison. But if one is successful in following the regulations and comes to the transcendental position, he or she begins to drink real nectar and he enjoys life. Now the example given is that of jaundice. Jaundice is a disease you get oftentimes in third world countries. Many people used to get it, and they still do when they go to India. Even Indians get it. Jaundice is usually a disease that's caused by drinking contaminated water or eating food that's contaminated. And it affects the liver, and you become yellow. If you want to be yellow for Halloween, you can drink some contaminated water, you'll be naturally yellow, right? But very sick. It makes you very, very sick. You can't even get out of bed. So, traditionally what they do in India is the cure for jaundice is sugar candy. Now, when they give sugar candy to a person and a person has jaundice, when they eat it, they think it's bitter. Is sugar candy bitter? No, but because they're sick, they think it's bitter and it tastes bitter. But as they keep eating it little by little, all of a sudden it tastes sweet, and then they're cured. So, in the same way, people who are sick due to sense gratification, when they come to the temple and they hear, well, you have to wake up early, you have to take a bath, you have to come to Mangalarti, you have to chant 16 rounds, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's poison for them. They say, oh, I can't do this, it's horrible, I can't wake up until, 9 o'clock in the morning, otherwise I don't get enough sleep. I need at least 10 hours of sleep or 11 hours of sleep. So, they think it's poison. But if they agree to be disciplined and follow the schedule and try their best, little by little, the poison turns into nectar. And they gain control of their senses and the mind. And they start feeling transcendental pleasure by chanting Hare Krishna. So the only reason it's poison is because they're contaminated. Just like the only reason sugar candy tastes bitter to the person with jaundice is because of their sickness. As soon as the sickness is healed, they see that the sugar candy is actually sweet. Right? Okay, then it says, that happiness which is derived from contact of the senses with their objects, and which appears like nectar at first, but poison at the end, is said to be of the nature of passion. So, in purport it says, a young man and a young woman meet, and the senses drive the young man to see her, to touch her, and to have sexual intercourse. In the beginning, this may be very pleasing to the senses, but at the end, or after some time, it becomes just like poison. They are separated, or there is divorce, there is lamentation, there is sorrow, etc. Such happiness is always in the mode of passion. Happiness derived from a combination of the senses and the sense objects is always a cause of distress and should be avoided by all means. So this is, now we're beginning to get into the realm of illusory happiness. So, two people meet, after some time they exchange, I love you, and then they have their first argument, and then the arguments continue later on. I love you becomes I hate you. So, it's sad, but that happens a lot. What begins like nectar ends up like poison. That's happiness in the mode of passion. And then that happiness which is blind to self-realization, which is delusion from beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion, is said to be of the nature of ignorance. One who takes pleasure in laziness and in sleep is certainly in the mode of darkness, ignorance, and one who has no idea how to act and how not to act is also in the mode of ignorance. For the person in the mode of ignorance, everything is illusion. For the person, there is no happiness either in the beginning or at the end. For the person in the mode of passion, there might be some kind of ephemeral or temporary happiness in the beginning, and at the end distress. But for the person in the mode of ignorance, there is only distress both in the beginning and at the end. So, Jai Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai Namo Namaskar Puti Smati Bhakti Smati You should give your obeisances. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Guru Bhakti. So now, illusory happiness is especially in the mode of passion. Something begins like nectar and ends up like poison, and it bewilders people. I said, I love you, and the other person said, I love you. Now they say, I hate you, and I say, I hate you. They can't understand how it happened. The love turned to hate because it was an illusory happiness. Just like illusory happiness happens a lot on Christmas morning. Christmas morning, two brothers come down, one older brother, one young brother, or two twin brothers come down, and they start opening up their presents under the Christmas tree, and one brother gets a book about dinosaurs, and the other brother gets a remote control car. So the brother with the remote control car starts pressing the button of the remote control, and the car starts going all over the place. And the brother with the dinosaur book looks at it for about 10 seconds, then throws it on the ground and tries to grab the remote control from the other brother. And then they get into a fight. That's called illusory happiness. The brother who got the twin brother who got the dinosaur book, has a feeling that the brother that got the remote control car got a much better present than he did. So now there's a fight. And if the first brother takes the remote control away from the second brother, the second brother gets angry and starts crying. And then he goes back and starts fighting with the first brother again. And there you go. It's all illusory happiness, you say. So this illusory happiness is a very dangerous thing because it keeps people from trying for self-realization. They're so involved in trying to sustain illusory happiness, and it's not sustainable. So it just causes misery and suffering. Okay, so that was supposed to be our homework that nobody did. And then now, today, we're going to talk about real quickly, the way to understand more clearly the difference between the point of view of the atheists and the point of view of the Vaishnavas. Prabhupada continues in the Life Comes from Life on Morning Walk 8. And he says, now we're going to continue writing different points of divergence between the atheists or the evolutionists and Darwinists and so forth, and devotees. Yeah. Okay, so far we have four points. Now we'll continue. So, Dr. Singh says, but do life and matter come simultaneously? Prabhupada, no. They do not come at all. They already exist. The coming idea is in our minds, because we are living in the limited world where we see that there is a beginning to everything. Therefore, we think in terms of coming or beginning, but actually matter and spirit already exist. So, we said both matter and spirit are eternal. They do not begin at a certain time and end at a certain time. So Prabhupada gives the idea of fire. As soon as there's fire, there's simultaneously heat and light. So because there's Krishna, there's also matter and spirit simultaneously. And Krishna is eternal, so matter and spirit coming from him, so they're also eternal. And then Dr. Singh says, and the living entities are made to live in different bodies according to their desires. Prabhupada, yes. For example, the government constructs a prison house because it knows there will be criminals. So when a criminal is tried and convicted, the prison already exists, even before the judgment period. Similarly, God is described as Sarvagya, he who knows everything. Thus he knows that some living entities will become criminal and rebel against his service. Furthermore, he knows that the various desires of the living entities in the material world acquired according to the three modes of nature. Therefore, he creates all species of life from the very beginning to accommodate all the conditioned souls. Okay, so Krishna knows everything, so he knows there will always be some people who will revolt against him. Yes? No, why do you say they're not real? Which verse? Huh? No, what's not real is the theory that dinosaurs have become extinct. We explained that the 8,400,000 species exist not only on the earth, but throughout the whole universe. So there are things in the universe that you won't see on the earth. And on the earth, if they claim something is extinct, it never goes extinct. It simply could be somewhere else, or it can be hidden. And they often declare a species extinct, and then 20, 30 years later they find one still existing. Yes?
Are these species like consciousness species or physical species?
Physical. Like a house is not conscious, right? So there's different houses in Sammamish.
Because in Alexa I was told that there's states of consciousness, and those are the species.
Well, each species has a certain mixture of the modes of material nature, and therefore a living entity that has that type of consciousness takes birth in a species. Like, for example, let's say there's a man, but he loves to eat meat. And at the moment of death, oftentimes these criminals, before they die, they get a choice. What do you want for your last meal? So they say, I want steak, I want pizza, I want a hot dog, I want, lamb chops, I want pork chops. Whatever they ask, they get, right? So usually they ask a lot of meat, right? So with that in their consciousness at the moment of death, they take birth like a tiger. A tiger can eat meat without any sinful reaction. It's made to eat meat. Its whole physical body is for meat eating. The human body is not made for eating meat. You can, but it puts a strain on the body. But a tiger's body is perfect for eating meat. So therefore, a person who's always meditating or eating meat, they will take birth as a tiger that has that particular consciousness.
So when you say that all the species are present throughout the universe,
The matter is not conscious, you understand? It's the person. But the body of a tiger is specifically for someone who wants to eat meat and not have any sinful reaction. Okay?
so are these species they're present throughout the universe, right?
Yes.
So then,
So there might be some species that are not present on the earth.
so say we did take a look at another planet.
Yeah.
Which might not have a climate that's suitable for survival.
For human beings. Yeah.
Then would that species not be present on that planet?
Well, no, the species present on that planet would have a body suitable for living in the atmosphere of that planet. Like, for example, on the sun, there are living entities present. We know that Vivaswan or Surya, he's a living entity like us. But his bodily construction is different. The main element of the body on the sun is fire. There is some earth, there is a little bit of water, a little bit of air, right? But the main thing is fire. Whereas here, the main element in our body is water, and then comes earth, and then comes air and fire, and of course space. So we would not be able to see the people on the sun. Now, the main element on the moon is the mind. It's a subtle element. So we would not see them either. But they have bodies just like we do. But the elements that make up the body are in different proportions than on the earth. Yes?
Would girls and boys be different species then?
No. The same species. Okay, you could say, well, are black people a different species? No. They're all human. Right? There can be varieties within the one species, but they're all human. Right?
When I looked it up on the internet, there were more species found on Earth, like more species than April formally, just on Earth.
It depends how they count the species. Like I just said, human being is a species. Demigod is a species. Right? So how many different types of human beings? Yeah, there's a lot of different types of human beings. How many different types of demigods? There's a lot of different types of demigods. But if you say species, they would all be grouped in one group. Right? Now, if they classify every different type of human being as a species, that's another way of counting. Right? So how many species have they identified on the Earth? Okay. But see, it depends how you classify things. Okay. Okay, so. Well, no, there's 400,000 different species of, let's say, human-like forms. Oh, we'll go into that again. We'll look at it again. But see, here it says, and these modes are manifested in different types of species. He says these modes, right? Not conscious. The person is conscious, not the species is conscious. But the species is influenced by certain types of modes, okay? Are manifested in different types of species, which include plants, trees, aquatics, human beings, demigods, cats, dogs, and many others. So the species are aquatics and reptiles, insects, birds, mammals, human beings. I missed one. Anyway, right there, there's 6. Okay, now, how many types of human beings are there? We would have to find out. How many types of aquatics are there? How many types of plants? You have to find out how they're categorizing the species within the general title. So here he's talking about plants, trees, aquatics, human beings, demigods, cats, dogs, and many others, totaling 8,400,000. Okay, so we'll look into it. I'll come back and I'll research. You can research it also. We'll come back and share what we find. My understanding is that human being is a species. Now, there can be subcategories of the different species. And we have to find out how they're counting in the Vedic tradition, as opposed to how the scientists are counting. Okay. So the Supreme Lord, the three modes of material nature are Sattva Guna, Rajaguna, and Tamaguna. With these three qualities, all the different objects of the material world are made, just as one might mix three primary colors, blue, red, and yellow, to make millions of hues or combinations. The great expertise required to handle this arrangement exists in nature. According to the Bhagavad Gita 3:27, Pakrite Kriyamanani Gunai Karmani Sarvasaha. All activities are performed by the modes of material nature. And these modes are manifested in different types of species, which include plants, trees, aquatics, human beings, demigods, cats, dogs, and many others, totaling 8,400,000. The Supreme Lord expands himself as the Paramatma, or Supersoul, in everyone's heart. Although dwelling in the material body, this Supersoul is not material, even though he is the original source of the material body. Because heat and light are the energies of the sun never feels too hot. Similarly, for the Paramatma, there's no distinction between spiritual and material, because both the material and the spiritual energies emanate from him. Sometimes we see that clouds cover the sun, but that is actually our imperfection. We on this planet experience both sunshine and cloudiness, but on the sun, even though it can create clouds, only sunshine is experienced. Similarly, the division of matter and spirit is our experience, not God's. Whether he comes in a so-called material body or in a spiritual body, he is always spiritual. For him, matter and spirit are the same because he is the energetic. He can turn matter into spirit and spirit into matter. So, therefore, there's electricity. Now, electricity can make a heater work, but it can also make an air conditioner work. The energy is the same, but the functions, according to where the energy is put into, can be different. So, as far as Krishna is concerned, all his energies are spiritual. But we see material and spiritual. Just like we see the sun today, because the sun is shining, right? Now, tomorrow could be a very cloudy day. We don't see the sun. Are the clouds covering the sun? What do you think? Yes. What do you think? Yes? No. Yes. What do you think? What? No. Okay, why do you think yes? Why do you think no? What?
From our point of view, the cover.
Okay, so my question was, are the clouds covering the sun? No. And you say? No. Yeah, the answer is no. The clouds are covering our eyes. Now, if you fly in an airplane above the clouds, you don't see any clouds anymore, you just see the sun. You see that the clouds were covering our eyes, not the sun. Right? So for Krishna, there's no such thing as matter and spirit. It's all spiritual. There is a differentiation of superior spiritual energy and inferior spiritual energy. The superior spiritual energy is always manifest, and inferior spiritual energy is sometimes manifest and sometimes not manifest. But it's all spiritual. It's all eternal. So the scientists see only matter. The devotees see life and matter. And Krishna, let's say, spiritual people see life and matter, but Krishna sees only spirit. Right? We see matter, we think matter is different than the soul. It is, but matter is also eternal like the soul. However, matter depends on the soul. The Materialists think that matter is independent, and that the soul evolves from matter. Okay, so there are major differences in the way people look at life. Major differences between the atheists and the scientists and the devotees. Dr. Singh, the chemists and the scientists think that certain elements enable the spirit soul to remain in the material world. These elements, they say, are carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, the main elements that combine to form living units. I think the Vedas teach that in order for a living creature to develop, spirit must first enter within these pre-existing chemical elements. Is that correct? Prabhupada. Yes. For example, the earth contains everything necessary for a plant to grow, but you must first put a seed in the earth. Similarly, a mother has within her womb all the necessary ingredients for creating another body, but the father must first inject the semen or the seed into the womb. Then the child will develop. A dog forms a dog's body, and a human forms a human's body. Why? Because all the required ingredients are there, respectively. We find a certain quantity of chemicals in my body, a smaller quantity in an ant's body, and a greater quantity in an elephant's body. So if I can create so many more chemicals than an ant, and an elephant can create so many more chemicals than I can, then just think how many more chemicals God can create. This is the basis on which scientists should consider how hydrogen and oxygen combine to form water. Otherwise, they cannot identify the source of the vast quantities of hydrogen and oxygen required to make the oceans. So here is a logical development of thought by Srila Prabhupada. The question is, and we went over this yesterday, but we'll go over it again. There's such a thing, there's H2O, right? What is that? It's water. Water is two hydrogen atoms, one oxygen atom, connected together into a molecule. Now, if you were to make H2O in your high school or junior high school laboratory, what would you have to do to make it? Huh? You need heat and pressure, but you also need hydrogen and oxygen. So you could buy a canister of hydrogen from a scientific laboratory supply company. It probably costs about $50. And you could buy a canister of oxygen, also from the same scientific laboratory supply company, probably like maybe the same. So now you have hydrogen in a canister, you have oxygen in a canister. Now what else do you need? You need a pressurized tunnel or a pressurized type of pot or something, right? And you need the plumbing that's connected to it, so you can inject the hydrogen gas and the oxygen gas into the pressurized container. Right? Then you need more plumbing to create the pressure in the container. Right? 1 time, 2 times the atmospheric pressure, or 3 times, or 10 times. Then you need some heat. So that's more things connected to the tunnel, right? And that's a lot of plumbing, a lot of electricity. Now, you're able to make with your canisters, 2 canisters, and quantity of hydrogen and oxygen, maybe, let's say, a cup full of water. And it costs you probably $1,000 or $2,000 to do it, because you had to get the electrician, you had to get the plumber, you had to get the pressurized chamber, all these things. Now we go down to Alki Beach, and we look at the Pacific Ocean, and all of a sudden you become bewildered. It took me $1,000 or $2,000 to make 1 cup of water. How did all this hydrogen and oxygen combine to make the Pacific Ocean? Right? All of a sudden you're stuck. You can't figure out. But you made a cup of water, and it cost so much money, so much time. You had to get the help of so many people. How did that ocean get there? An ocean of hydrogen and oxygen. Where was that container, pressurized container? Where did the heat come from? The heat, just to heat water let's say you have a pot full of water, it could take, bring it to boiling, it could take like 20 minutes to a half an hour. How would you boil that quantity of water in the Pacific Ocean? What amount of heat would you need to heat it up? You see, all of a sudden you end up with something mystical. That's why Prabhupada says, whenever you go to the origin of things, you end up with something called achintya shakti, mystical power. Something you cannot produce yourself. You see? So the scientists, they don't want to deal with the origin of things because they don't want to get stuck on this mystical power issue. Otherwise, they just go back and forth arguing all the time and coming up with newer and newer theories, and then they have to throw that theory out and bring in another theory. And none of the theories will work when you're dealing with the origin of something. Okay, so Prabhupada used this logical way, a rational way, to prove that chemicals are produced by bodies. The ant has a small body, it produces chemicals. A cow has a certain body, it produces chemicals. Right? The human being has a certain body, it produces chemicals. Now we know where chemicals come from. They come from bodies. Do you accept that? Let's just analyze the human body. Human body produces urine, stool, tears, saliva, wax, hair, nails, blood, plasma, bones. We can go down the list. It produces thousands of chemical things, right? So now we can understand by comparison. The ant produces a certain quantity of chemicals. The human being produces a bigger quantity of chemicals. The elephant produces a bigger quantity of chemicals. And the Virat Rupa, the universal form of Krishna, produces all the chemicals. You see. Chemicals are produced by the human body. Now, when they have these factories that produce chemicals, they're just imitating the human body. Okay, so Prabhupada he says, this hydrogen and oxygen, he says, this is the basis on which scientists should consider how hydrogen and oxygen combine to form water. Otherwise, they cannot identify the source of the vast quantities of hydrogen and oxygen that exist in the Virat Rupa, the universal body of the Lord. Why do the scientists fail to understand this plain truth? Hydrogen and oxygen combine to form the water in the seas. We both accept this fact, but the scientists are surprised to hear that the origin of this huge quantity of hydrogen and oxygen is actually achintya shakti, or the inconceivable mystic power of the Lord. Otherwise, they can't figure out where it all came from. They can make some theories, but that theory doesn't work. This theory works, because we know that bodies can produce chemicals. And the bigger body produces more chemicals. So the biggest body would produce all the chemicals. It's just logical. The definition of life. Dr. Singh, I have noticed a disagreement within the scientific community over the definition of living and non-living. Some say that if a being can reproduce, it is alive. Therefore, they claim to have created life because certain large DNA chemicals produced in a laboratory can replicate themselves. That is, they can reproduce other chains of molecules by their own power. Some scientists say these DNA molecules are living, and others say they are not. Prabhupada. Because somebody is saying one thing and somebody else is saying another thing, their knowledge must be imperfect. Dr. Singh. Can we define living as containing consciousness and non-living as without consciousness? Srila Prabhupada. Yes. That is the difference. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Avinasi tu tadvidi yena sarvam idam tatam. That which is spread all over the body is indestructible. Anyone can understand that what is spread all over a living body, it is consciousness. According to our consciousness, at the time of death, we are awarded a particular bodily shape. If you have a dog's consciousness, you will get a dog's body. And if you have a godly consciousness, you will get a demigod's body. Krishna gives everyone the freedom to take whatever body he wants. Okay, so that answers your question. The body itself is not conscious, but the soul within the body is the source of the consciousness of the body. But the body is a combination of modes of material nature. And therefore, if a person has a particular consciousness, they're put in a particular type of body or species of body that favors that type of consciousness. Yes. Okay. All right, we're almost finished. Darwin condemned. Dr. Singh, if a human being doesn't attain liberation, does he have to pass through all 8,400,000 species of life before again coming to the human form? Prabhupada, no. Only in the lower forms of life does the living entity progress step by step, according to the laws of nature. In the human form of life, he is endowed with developed consciousness. He has discretion. Therefore, if he is advanced in consciousness, he is not going to get the body of a dog or cat. He will get another human body. The word yoga brasta refers to someone practicing yoga who somehow or other could not fully succeed. There's no question of evolution here. He is again awarded a human body. He does not get a cat's body or a dog's body. As with the apartments we were discussing, if you can pay more, you get a nicer apartment. You do not have to come to the lower class apartment first. Dr. Singh, what you have been saying completely contradicts Darwin's theory of evolution. Srila Prabhupada, Darwin is a rascal. What is his theory? We kick out Darwin's philosophy. The more we kick out Darwin's philosophy, the more we advance in spiritual consciousness. Dr. Singh, many scientists doubt Darwin's theories, but Darwin's supporters say that life started from matter and evolved from unicellular organisms to multicellular organisms. They believe that higher species like animals and men did not exist at the beginning of creation. Jai Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai. Hare Krishna. Yes. Did you hear Prabhupada say that? So then ignore it. If Prabhupada said it, you must follow it. Okay? Yep. Many scientists doubt Darwin's theories, but Darwin's supporters say that life started from matter and evolved from unicellular organisms to multicellular organisms. They believe that higher species like animals and men did not exist at the beginning of creation. So this is false, completely false. Right from the beginning, all the species were created. Prabhupada has that in the Bhagavad Gita also. And there's no question of bodies developing from unicellular organisms to multicellular organisms. That whole theory of Darwin is wrong. However, there is the evolution of consciousness. As your consciousness, the consciousness is different from one body to another. Yeah. That's not. They still have a body, and it's the same structure-wise. It's just it might be a little bigger. Like, right? Would you say there's evolution of bodies right now because somebody's born and becomes 8 feet tall, and another person is born and is only 3 feet tall? Is that evolution? No, it's not evolution.
Estrogen is becoming smaller. Like the entire species is bigger or smaller. What does that mean? It's not interspecies.
Okay, like look at this. A person finds a gold nugget, and it weighs, let's say, 10 pounds. They take the nugget, melt it down, and they make a ring that weighs a quarter gram, or a quarter, let's say, a quarter ounce. Is that evolution of gold? No. There's big gold and there's little gold, but it's all gold. Evolution would mean gold became iron, or iron became gold. Then that's evolution. You know, yes.
Like, I have hypothesis of how like sediments and other rocks.
Okay. Can the rock go back to sediment? No? You sure? You sure it can? Yes, it can. I'm going to explain how. There are certain microbes and funguses that digest rocks, break them down into powder. That powder is absorbed through other funguses and microbes by the roots of plants, and they render those inorganic rock particles or powder into organic material, and it becomes part of the plant. Later on, the plant dies and is squished over a long period of time. It becomes sediment, and then eventually, by more squishing, it becomes rock. So you have this cycle. Right? What?
Is it like how water breaks like two rocks?
Yeah, the water can do it, and there's certain funguses and bacteria that can do it also. Right? So that doesn't mean that there's an evolution. See, there are certain cycles in nature. It's called the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle. There are different cycles where you see, like there's sunlight, and then the plant captures the sunlight as photosynthesis. It draws water also from its roots, and you have this energy, and also draws in carbon dioxide, and it produces glucose and releases oxygen. Now, this glucose is a form of energy, and when billions and billions of plants are compressed over a long period of time, it becomes either gas, oil, or coal. In other words, millions of plants have been compressed, and that glucose, which changes into other, more complex carbohydrates and sugars and things, is compacted now in coal or oil or gas. Then those things are extracted from the earth, purified somewhat, and now you have combustion engines that use the gasoline as a source of energy. But where did that energy come from? It came originally from the sun that was captured by the plants and turned into glucose, and then glucose into other complex sugars, and then it was compacted. And now when you add a spark to it, in the form of gas, it explodes. Or when you add fire to it, it burns like coal. And then now the energy is released back into the atmosphere, and there's a cycle that takes place. It's called the carbon cycle. There's a nitrogen cycle. There are many cycles in nature. If you study them, you see that there's such a thing as conservation of energy. The energy is never lost. But the form that it takes varies. Now, who did that? Was that done by, scientists? No. Well, yeah, it was done by a scientist, but the name of the scientist is Krishna and his devas. Whenever you have an arrangement that seems to work automatically, did it happen by accident? Like you have an arrangement. It's called a Chevrolet car. Right? That was arranged by General Motors. Right? Did it happen by accident? No. When you put the key in the ignition, you turn it, the car starts. You put your foot on the acceleration pedal, the car goes forward. You put your foot on the brake, the car stops. Who made that arrangement? Did it happen by accident? No. So you have these different arrangements, complex arrangements in nature called carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, this cycle, that cycle. Did it just happen by accident? All these complex chemical changes, compacting? No. If the car didn't happen by accident, how can you say that all this complex chemical changes going on in nature happened by accident? It's an arrangement that was made by a superior intelligence. Yes?
Doesn't that mean that, isn't that always been that we not be
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Although the atheists and the atheistic scientists say, human beings also evolved by some fortunate accident. Because they can't explain it, they give other alternate explanations that don't make any sense. So here Prabhupada says, Darwin and his followers are rascals. If originally there were no higher species, why do they exist now? Also, why do the lower species still exist? In other words, Darwin's theory is there's evolution, survival of the fittest. So when one species adapts to its environment and eventually produces a superior species, then how come the inferior ones are still there? All the inferior ones are still there. They should have disappeared and been overtaken by the superior ones. Yeah, we were a superior species, but still the monkeys are there. Yeah. Why do both these entities exist simultaneously? Why hasn't the ass form evolved upward and disappeared? Why do we never see a monkey giving birth to a human? The Darwinist theory that human life began in such and such an era is nonsense. Bhagavad Gita says that you can directly transmigrate to any species of life you like, according to your efforts. Sometimes I travel to America, sometimes to Australia, and sometimes to Africa. The countries already exist. I am simply traveling through them. It is not that because I have come to America, I have created or become America. And there are many countries I have not yet seen or created. Right? Does that mean they do not exist? All those countries exist. Right? All the species already exist right from the beginning of time. The scientists who support Darwin are nonsensical. Bhagavad Gita clearly says that all the species exist simultaneously and that you can go to whichever species you like. You can even go up to the kingdom of God if you so desire. All this is declared in Bhagavad Gita by Lord Krishna. Okay. So we see that there are many dramatic differences between the speculative theories of the scientists and the axiomatic truths of the Vedas. Axiomatic means they're self-evident. Self-evident means you can't argue against them. Right? That can you argue with someone if someone says, if you say, every human being has a mother and father, can you argue against it? Can you find a person that doesn't have a mother and father? No, you can't. Even the test tube baby has a mother and father, if you know what that means. See? Okay, so we'll stop right there and continue next week. If you have this book, read it. It's a very interesting book. But see, reading it is not enough. You have to go over it line by line, because every line, every statement Prabhupada makes is a formidable source of knowledge. In other words, every line is full of transcendental knowledge in this book. So we took some notes today. I didn't take, let's see, what notes did we take? We went over yesterday's notes, but we should add a few more. So, okay. Definition of living. Scientists say anything that reproduces is living. And they give the example of certain DNA molecules. The Vedas say that anything that has consciousness is living. So, Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita 2:17, Avinasi tu tadvidi, yena sarvam idam tatam. That which is spread all over the body is indestructible. So, is the body indestructible? No. It's the consciousness in the body that's indestructible, because that's a symptom of the soul. Okay, then number 2 new note for today. Prabhupada logic. Bodies create chemicals. Example, ant's body, human body, elephant body, Virat Rupa body. Virat Rupa is Krishna's universal form. So now we know, by analogy, or by comparison, the ant produces a certain amount of chemicals. The human being produces a certain amount of chemicals. The elephant produces a certain amount of chemicals. You know, the ant is less than a human being is less than the elephant. So now now the question is, where did all the H and O come from? Because in the ocean. Answer, Virat Rupa, Krishna's universal body. Just like your body produces perspiration, right? But how much do you perspire? Well, very little bit, maybe this much. When Krishna's universal form perspires, it creates oceans. Now we know where all that H and O came from and where the oceans came from. Haribol. All glories to Prabhupada. Huh? Homework for next week is write 1 or 2 paragraphs defeating Darwin's theory of evolution. Okay, homework. Write 1 or 2 paragraphs defeating Darwin's theory of evolution. So mainly you're going to write some bullet points. And to help you, Anandaram Prabhu, can you print out Morning Walk 8 and give them each a copy? Okay? So we'll give you the copy of what we just read. You read it. Yeah, with the notes that you have from the class yesterday. And people have written big books trying to defeat Darwin, right? And you can do it in 2 paragraphs. Okay? It shows you how powerful it is reading Prabhupada's statements. You can defeat Darwin in 2 paragraphs. You don't have to write big, long books to do it. Whereas other people, they write these big books and they're still not sure if Darwin's theory is defeated. Hare Krishna. So one argument is, Darwin says that through evolution, species evolve.